So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us, the future leaders from the industry. And I guess the simplest question is to say, please follow on from the discussion we've just had. I mean, the conversation, the questions we've had with our future leaders from a slightly different perspective. What is the future from your perspective? Let me just quickly get an opening statement from all of you. Jay, we'll begin at the far end with you.
Sure. I think, so I represent the new energy business of Petronas, and it is new. So I just set up last year, and it's really looking at the future of the energy industry, given this energy transition that's taking place all around the world, and that future is quite uncertain. So Petronas took the decision to diversify, go into some new business areas. One was specialty chemicals, the other is new energy, to really future-proof the business against some of this energy transition. So we can't say we know exactly what the future looks like, but we have an idea of what it is, and that means that we need to be able to respond to those changes and to be able to diversify where our cash comes from.
And obviously, we're all aware that changes are afoot and the entire landscape is being completely remade, if only because of technology. But it's not just technology, is it? It's regulation, it's growing social awareness, it's, as we talked about before, emotional buy-in from the consumers. It does seem that there is a significant amount of pressure upon industries and upon companies to change. So Chua Ki Heng, SP Services CEO, Singapore Power Group CEO, how is all that reflecting in your future planning?
At least in Singapore, it's almost like an existential problem. About 30% of Singapore, it's 5 centimeters above sea level. So climate change is a serious issue. So from the top right to the citizens of Singapore, I think there's awareness of that. And to the extent that the goal is to reduce our carbon emission by 36% in 2030, that's a governmental direction. But from our shareholder and investor, the idea is for Temasek companies to reduce the carbon emission by half. That's way ahead of the national agenda by 2030. So in concert with that, all the respective companies are doing their best. And for us, we are doing our best. I mean, we are investing in electric vehicles ahead of time, meaning we are investing in 1,000 fast DC charging stations by the end of 2020. There are definitely less than 1,000 electric vehicles in Singapore. But the move to EV by the turn of 2025, due to parity in total cost of ownership and so on, would suggest that we need to be ready with the infrastructure so that we can help support this uptake of EVs and increase electrification in transportation.
But are you saying that's what is weighing most on your mind is the science and possibly rising seas more than the consumer demand for renewable energies?
No, it's also manifested in consumer demand. I mean, consumers right now right now Singapore has gone through the retail contestability. There are packages out there that offer customers green energy. It's fungible, but the point is that they are solar players and they are offering green energy, and there's openness and acceptance of those packages. So I think consumers are very open, are willing to invest and spend money on green products.
Dr. Sharbini, I mean, your company has made the transition largely and has committed itself to a renewable future. Yeah. But was this from conviction on your part or from pressure from the consumer?
No, I think, I think today you see that the demand for renewable energy is growing very fast. And you also see that there's a big shift towards green energy investment. So we are, in fact, very fortunate that our state leaders in the past have this good foresight in embarking on this hydropower journey. Yeah. So in fact, we are moving in tandem with what the development around the world is. So I think today we are sitting in quite a good place. As I mentioned, we are 76% hydro now, and we are putting in place solar projects as well, not only on land but on water surface as well. So it is it's a combination of what's happening around the world and the vision of our leaders in the state, yeah, which has driven us to where we are today. And And we are very fortunate to be in a position where we can, in fact, fundamentally, move from here towards a more greener future.
Yes, you've already been on a panel earlier on today, and the audience is familiar with some of your perspectives. But just from this future-looking perspective, what are your thoughts?
Yep. We are in the business of selling electricity, and we see the demand, as mentioned by Dato' just now, the demand of green energy, value-added services being, required more and more by the customers. So it's about meeting that customer's demand to start with, and it's also about learning and trying to be in this business early enough so that, if one day the traditional utility, the traditional tenaga is no longer around, we transform ourselves to a different form of company which meets the requirement of the customers.
You're in the business of selling electricity. That's kind of an interesting way to frame it, because what we're talking about a lot is actually, are we not now in the business of saving the planet? Is this not what we're supposed to be doing?
Yep. The purpose, I think, we are in the process of revisiting the purpose of the company. I mean, previously, traditionally, your utility, you look yourself as selling electricity, you stop there. Going forward in the future, it's about providing more values, and one of the value that we think that we could associate with is providing sustainable electricity. So not only that, not only selling electricity, but along the way we have to do it right to save the planet and be sustainable in the business as well as in the process of generating and providing the services to customers.
There was a question that came up in the last panel that I want to put to this one because it seems a bit more appropriate. And I'll put it to you, but generally thrown out there. The question was, are there any policies or push to make renewable energy more affordable for the general public, like cheaper electric cars and smart home batteries? I don't know whether in the regulatory field, as you've come across it, there has been the suggestion that perhaps there should be this kind of financial encouragement to get buy-in?
To a certain extent, I think Malaysia, through the latest budget announced for 2020, we have already announced some tax deferment for developers as well as for owners, for customers. So to a certain extent, it's already there. Whether it's enough or, one tricky position is actually Malaysia generally has a relatively low tariff. So for renewables to be able to be on a competitive level to the tariff right now, it's quite challenging, but it's not impossible. There are already means and incentives provided through the government.
How does the tariff situation play into your investment analysis as you're looking for things to get into, Jay?
I think it's important, and obviously when we're looking at the renewable energy market, we're looking actually globally. So those tariffs and those regimes and those policies are very different in different countries. So when we look at Malaysia, as you mentioned, it might be very different to India, for example, which is probably the lowest cost producer of renewable energy.
And how quickly is that situation evolving or changing or improving from an investment perspective?
It's very quick, and for an oil and gas company who's just getting into renewable energy, it's a sort of a speed that changes, within a few months, particularly because the regulation or policy may change overnight in one country and completely change the market.
Private solar energy generation is very low in Sarawak. What can be done to encourage this? And I suppose, do we want to encourage this?
No, I think we are quite open to to people who wants to come in. But the question is whether they're able to have that value in that business to be sustainable. But we ourselves are, trying to ensure that we also play in that game in terms of putting in place solar system, not only in the rural areas, but as well connected to the grid. I mentioned earlier that we are now working on, and in fact would be putting in place 30 to 50 megawatts of floating solar on our Batang Ai dam. Yeah? So, and that is to me a start for us to be getting in even bigger share of alternative renewable into our gen mix rather than just hydro. So, but if anybody else wants to come in, we are always pleased or happy to talk to people who want to invest.
Yes, you talked about TNB maybe at some point in the future being redundant or having to reinvent itself completely. How are you preparing for that? I mean, what are you doing strategically to address that possibility, aside from the establishment of this renewable department? I mean, what else is happening?
Right. Throughout the company, I think right now, everyone realized just by looking at what happened in the Europe and the US, utilities are starting to reorganize themselves, putting a focus more on sustainability and business related to beyond the meters mainly. Batteries are coming, and also not only to looking at electricity related businesses, but bundling it with communications, bundling it with safety, security, and few other things that can come or complement this. So not only we are reorganizing ourselves, but we are relooking at the business landscape, looking at new products to offer to the customer, and as well as always trying to be proactive and offer things that such as insurance, which might be out of the if it's out of the it's not the norm for utility to be talking about this. So those are some of the things that we're looking at.
I think utilities and industry players can play a very big role in helping customers and end users in understanding, for instance, carbon emission usage or carbon emissions that has been emitted by the consumer. So in Singapore, by the end of the month, all 1.6 million customers will have access to an app that shows the carbon emission. It's called carbon tracker. So you can know how much carbon you have emitted maybe every half an hour, because our AMI or our smart meters provide consumption on a half an hour basis. But we reframe the conversation from consumption and tariff to carbon that you emit. So that will help you in the scope 2 of the carbon emission. Then if we add in audit tools, we can help you do scope 1 as well. But the point is that I think the idea is to have something that's very relevant, that resonates with people right now. You use trackers like how many steps you do and so on. So we try to build it into their lives as a carbon tracker, so they can know on a granular basis how much carbon they are emitting, and then they can make future choices in a more informed basis.
And you can have a league table of the biggest emitters, and you can have competition as well.
Yes.
They already do that in Singapore to a certain extent. They publish the electricity bills that show what your consumption is relative to your neighbor, right?
Yes, it's a gamification that seems to nudge people to do better, or to, in a way, it's a very strange thing, because as a company, most other companies want you to spend more. We want you to spend less or use less. So we try to nudge you to the lowest or most efficient neighbor in your neighborhood.
Any plans for Sarawak Energy to use gamification to get more customers?
Not at this point in time, but it's a very interesting concept. So,
but to the point that Yus was making, and maybe for both SP and Petronas, the idea that the renewables might end up subsuming the parent as a way, is that something that comes up in your conversations?
It doesn't yet. But if you look at I think someone showed this morning, if you look at the scenarios out to 2050, then you see a very different picture. And so if you look at your business today, or look at Petronas's business today, with that scenario going out to 2050, then the sources of revenue may be very different. So although we're diversifying into new business areas, they may be very small today and a very small part of the revenues. They may become a key pillar of the future of the business.
I'm kind of, we spoke in the last panel, and the video that we showed up there was talking about, are we moving fast enough? Are we doing enough? Are we running out of time? And yet, so many times we sit on these panels and the conversation still revolves around how do we best make money out of the new technology, rather than how do we make the new technology do what it's supposed to do, and that is prevent the rise of the levels. I mean, am I looking at this the wrong way? Anyone?
Can I share?
Yeah.
Experience of us, we were segmenting the customers, trying to see or to highlight values that we bring on the rooftop solar. So we had 4 main segments, I think. The cost-conscious customers, the green-conscious, the trendsetters. I couldn't recall the other one. But we thought that, it will be evenly distributed. But to our surprise, after going to around 100 plus customers, only one sits on the sustainability or the green conscious customer. The rest will always ask you, how much do I pay and how much do I get back? How much do I save? So practically, I think it boils down to commercial viability, financial viability.
Yeah. So I think economics and commerciality is still a big factor when customers make a decision. Yeah? And just taking the example about electric cars just now. And, we have been trying, not only us here, but I'm sure in Singapore, in Peninsular Malaysia as well, trying to introduce electric cars, EVs. Yeah? In fact, because we feel that, because today one of the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide is transportation. So if we can change and move a lot of the transportation from current IC to EVs, I think that will contribute a lot towards, greening the environment and the transportation sector. But we have been trying to put in a lot of, infrastructures and like charging stations in many parts in Kuala Lumpur and here as well in Kuching. But the offtake of electric vehicles purchased by the people is very low. Yeah, and to me, at the end of the day, it's about economics and the life cycle cost of owning the EVs compared to a normal car. So if the government can give incentive, for example, if they can reduce the tax of these vehicles to very low, whereby it is now actually is more economic than owning a normal vehicle, I think there will be increased take-up. And I'm actually very interested to look at that, because if we can replace, for example, half of the motorcycles or cars in Kuching with electric bikes or electric cars, I think it will contribute a lot in terms of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide emission to the atmosphere.
Jay, there's a couple of questions specifically for Petronas, which I'll put to you. Many RE players are small and nimble, able to adapt to a quickly changing market, but Petronas is an NOC with strict project development process. How do you adapt?
It's a good question. So I myself come from the renewable energy industry and was asked to come in and help lead the business. So I think at Petronas, we recognize that it needs to be run differently from the traditional oil and gas business. So the processes that we're setting up to run that business and do projects is a fit-for-purpose way of doing it for the renewable energy industry.
Another question here for you. Are you planning to invest in emerging RE technology and do R&D on potential ones?
So, for our new energy business, we are really about commercial technologies and projects today. It's the business, but across Petronas, from university, for example, within UTP, from our group research and technology arm, through a venture fund that we just set up this year, which is a $350 million fund. We are looking at supporting those technologies of the future and the application of those through various parts of the business.
And let me just give you one final one. From my perspective, I mean, this is a new operation. You're driving it from a different mindset from the traditional business.
Yeah.
To what extent do you have flexibility to take it into any direction you want? And if you were to take it into any direction that you want, where do you see this? In the words of Idris Yalla earlier on, if you were to put out your 30-year target, what do you think your business will be doing?
I think in terms of where the business will go, so it's still very much from a Petronas perspective, it's still very much customer driven, because they're providing a whole array of products that people want, including, you know, chemicals, including gasoline, including LPG. Now, if that demand changes and it becomes more RE, for example, then that's the way the business will go.
Okay.
Right.
And a question for you, Dato. I think based upon what we've talked about already, a follow-up here. How does the growing interest in solar affect SEB's business model, knowing that more solar means less energy taken from the grid?
Yeah, of course, and you know, we look at our friends in Peninsular Malaysia as well, and you know, they have, of course, this what do you call?
G-Spark.
G-Spark, yeah. So basically, they decided to be involved in that business of installing solar on rooftop themselves. And of course, we look at that as well. But as I mentioned earlier, we do have other options as well, like you know, what do you call it? Solar, floating solar on the lakes, so that can then be connected to the grid. But in the future, I mean, there would the concept of what they call that generation, which is distributed, is I think going to be even bigger. Yeah. So we ourselves are looking at how that will play into our business. Yeah. So today we are looking at doing some pilots on microgrids, and as I mentioned that this afternoon we had an MOU signing with this Korean consortium to look at a microgrid at a small village nearby Kuching, and we want to see that how do we make such microgrid works in terms of not only technology and reliability, but also in terms of economics. So once we have that, then we can then perhaps replicate it in many parts of the state. And Sarawak is a very big state. So there are, I think, rooms for both grid connected and also for, you know, what do you call it, mini grids. And as far as solar is concerned, we know that there are many companies today who are offering, you know, to put solar on the rooftop. But I think the issue today is about the initial cost. Yeah. And I think this way G-Spark, you know, came to the market to say that Tenaga Nasional will then, you know, cater for that cost upfront. So we are looking at that concept as well, and it's something that we have been studying the number of rooftops in Sarawak, and we feel that if we put every solar panel in all the rooftops, we can generate a lot of power. So, but before somebody else come in, so we will better be there first. So we're looking at it now.
Let me put this, not because it's a Singapore question, but it's a fairly general question, but I think because you guys are planning so far ahead with the renewable charging stations on the street, I'm just wondering what else are you planning for in Singapore, and how do you see the future? And this is based on a question that's come out from the floor, which says, what inadequacies do you see in existing renewable energy policies? And I just want to add to that by saying, what potential do you see?
We are studying hydrogen because I think one of the things that we're looking at is how we can have hydrogen in homes. And one of the issues we have with hydrogen in homes is, of course, safety and all that. So we are doing precisely that R&D. In one of our buildings, it's the first zero-emission building in Southeast Asia, where we use hydrogen that ties with a metal alloy to actually form as a storage. So it's a metal hydrate storage. So it actually compresses more hydrogen into using lower pressure. So as such, it can be used safely in a very dense and urban setting like Singapore. So going forward, maybe that will be the future for homes, rather than using maybe other sources like gas and so on.
And there we will leave it. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Please show your appreciation for our panel, ladies and gentlemen. And once again, thank you all so much for your engagement and the questions that you've been feeding to us. Appreciate it.